Everybody. Welcome, everybody. And today we are looking at guns and domestic violence. And then I'm going to introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter is Ms. Claire Taylor. She's a researcher and a policy analyst at Gunfree South Africa. Taylor is a sociologist who has been working on gun violence prevention for over 15 years. She currently works for Gun-Free South Africa, a non-governmental organization working to create a safer country by reducing gun violence. As a research and policy analyst in this role, she helps guide GFSA's advocacy and public awareness raising to ensure that policies are evidence-based and that the voices of the unarmed majority are included. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Claire Taylor. You may proceed.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I thought I'd just show my face so you at least know what I look like. And say thank you very much to the National Shelter Movement for inviting me to do this presentation. It is going to reference work done by Lisa Betten, who many of you will know. She published a paper that Gunfree South Africa worked together with the National Shelter Movement, Mosaic and the Heinrich Ball Foundation on, that looks at gun violence in domestic violence. And so I will be referring to that. So I just wanted to acknowledge her contribution to today's proceedings. So I have done a slideshow and a short video. So you have to excuse my technical inadequacies as I transfer through both of them. But here is an overview of what I'm hoping to cover this morning. The video tells the stories of two women, Sasha Lee and Henrietta. Then what I do is look at what the research says about what gun violence against women looks like, and then try and pull out risks for gun violence in domestic violence based on what the data tells us. Then look at how we can take action to stop guns in domestic violence. And then I've got some questions that I thought that I'm curious about. And I wondered if you would be too, and if you had answers or other questions. And so I thought to have a bit of a discussion. So I'm going to stop share now and hopefully get this video up and running. So that's next on the agenda. So I have got this. So we are there. Yeah. Sorry about this. All right. Going to shut this down. I do apologize for this. Okay, so I am kind of back on the share. Okay. So I'm going to hit, can you all see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you. There's no sound, Claire.
Okay. Yeah, I mean it is playing, but it's just music.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I'm sorry that there wasn't the music in that, but it was just a musical compilation. So that tells two stories there, and both of those stories were case studies of people that were included in Lisa's research report. So the first is a story of who was shot and killed by her boyfriend. He had requested that his gun get removed, and his gun was not removed, and so kept threatening her. It turns out that he threatened a number of other women and a neighbor as well. His gun was not removed, and then he used that to kill Sasha Lee and him. And the second story is that of Henrietta, who, it's an interesting story because she was never threatened with a gun. She was threatened in many other ways. And she is research last year, and she's recovered from 8 years of incredibly abusive relationship. So those are two stories where guns are involved, but in very, very different ways. So I thought to next look at what the research says, because of studies, and the good thing about research is that it collects a whole lot of information to give us a sense of what guns and gun violence looks like. And so I'm putting on three separate pieces of information for this discussion. The first is doing 20 years basically of research into what femicide, so that's the murder of women, looks like in this country. And they've done them in different years. The first was in 1999, 10 years later in 2009, again in 2017, and then most recently in 2020, 2021 COVID lockdown. And there's a lot of interest in that latter one because there were so many changes in our world at that time. The second is a whole lot of smaller studies that were done, mainly in the Western Cape, Gauteng, and Mpumalanga over different years. And these were really looking at protection orders and different types of violence, including gun violence in domestic violence protection orders. And then lastly is looking at news gleaned from research from Mosaic data. So basically Mosaic has got court workers that work in 15 corporate. They're mainly in the Western Cape, but also in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. And these court workers assist women apply for, or assist people to apply for this, and gives us some insight into the circumstances under which people make these applications. So to look firstly at the Medical Research Council data, I mean, it's really, there are two graphics on the slide. The first is looking at femicide, women that are killed. It doesn't matter how they are killed, but they have been killed by a violent situation. And what you see is that the femicide rate per 100 people, so that just means that if you had a big room of 100,000 people, a big stadium, how killed, or at risk of getting killed. And so you see in 1999, 24 women out of 100,000 were killed that year. And that has dropped significantly. As you can see, it's dropped down to 10.6 women in 2020, 2021. Bearing in mind that in 2020, saw, for example, empty trauma units at hospitals, largely because there wasn't alcohol, but also people's and there were police and army deployed on the street. So it was a very unnatural situation. But if we deep dive into looking at how women are an intimate or non-intimate partner, we see as well that there's a similar decline in the number of women that are killed over those years from 1999 and 2021. And then we start seeing this increase in intimate partner femicide. Now, again, that's most likely due to the fact that women were at home and couldn't easily escape. What's interesting, though, from Gunfree's perspective, is that the non-intimate partner femicide, in fact, continued going down. But our monitoring of media reports that, in fact, more and more women are being killed in public, which would most likely be non-intimate partner femicides. And more women are being killed in mass shootings. So it's likely that the COVID restrictions has impacted on that number, and that it would most likely be higher if we were to do this kind of study now. If we look at the second figure, which is called figure 1, it just shows a graph, and it's the percentages of gun use in femicide. So what's interesting about it is that if you look at the gray figures, the gray number, we can see that it's actually the highest rate it's ever been. So even in 1999, when we had a huge number of women being killed, the number of women that were shot dead was not as high as the number of women that are shot dead currently. And what it's telling us is that guns are the leading weapon used to murder women in South Africa. And just to note that this is really important, because we know from South Africa's own experience that when we use guns, we save women's lives. So when the Firearms Control Act was passed in 2000, there was a real focus on reducing the availability of guns in this country. So the police, for example, were involved in recovering illegal guns. The new gun law required much stricter licensing requirements in order to get a gun. There were limits on the number of guns that people could own. So people had in guns during amnesties, etc. And what we saw then is a huge decrease in the number of women that were shot, to such an extent that in 1999, a woman was killed by her intimate partner every 6 hours. By 2009, a woman was killed by her intimate partner every 8 hours. So that meant 3 women, as opposed to 4 women, were killed every day by an intimate partner. And this is because the number of women that were shot dead had halved. So it was purely, and researchers, particularly Naima Abrahams, have shown that this was because of the Firearms Control Act and the impact that this had. What we start seeing, however, is from 2011, when Zuma came to power. I mean, now we look back at it and we can start recognizing it was when Zuma came to power, there was a hollowing out of a whole lot of state institutions. Organized crime started taking hold. We start seeing an increase in the number of men that are killed. And there's a steady increase, and this has continued. But women don't show that increase until 2020, 2021. And it seems as though the Firearms Control Act was possibly still protecting women, or certainly protecting them in the home. But more research needs to be done to understand exactly why women were protected in that time and what changed. I'm going to go on to another piece of research. These are smaller studies that were done in different provinces of South Africa, and they looked at a range of things. But for this input, I really wanted to look at protection orders and whether they protect women. And the bottom line is it's actually really difficult to know if they do protect women from gun violence. And there are three reasons for this. The first is that protection order applications don't always record the presence of a gun. So women are not aware, or family members are not aware that they can actually specifically note that a gun is there, even if the gun wasn't used to threaten, but that it's a risk factor. Like, people don't realize the risk of the gun in an abusive situation. Secondly, magistrates don't routinely ask about the presence of a gun. So it's not a question that automatically gets asked when faced with a situation of abuse or violence. And thirdly, and as we saw with the case of Sashali Shah, is that even when the police are instructed to remove the gun, they don't act on that instruction. And so we actually just don't know how effective protection orders are. Some of the research does show that, in fact, women, if you look at how many women who are killed have protection orders, it's quite a low number. But we're not sure if that's because they didn't apply for a protection order or because women who have protection orders aren't killed. So it's really difficult to understand. But it is important that people in this space understand that you can request that a firearm be removed even if the firearm hasn't been used in that abuse. So looking at what the research also shows in terms of risk factors for gun-related domestic violence, it seems that there are three very clear risk factors. The one is that there's a history of domestic violence. And other research, not in South Africa, but other research globally shows that there is usually a pattern of escalation before a femicide happens, and that this ranges, and when it's related to a gun, it could be that reference is made to the gun is held during an argument or cleaned during an argument. There are threats made to either shoot the person or somebody that they love, or a pet, or the perpetrator themselves, or the gun is fired. So these are patterns before a femicide actually happens. And so there's obviously opportunities to intervene to get the gun removed. The second risk factor is that there is a gun available. And just to say that in South Africa, research has shown that, in fact, a licensed gun is more likely to be used in situations of murder-suicide than an unlicensed gun. So just because the gun is licensed doesn't mean that it's a safe gun, that these licensed guns are also used to commit offense. And then, and the research is absolutely unequivocal in this, is that the perpetrators working in security or law enforcement are more likely to be involved in femicide. And this is because they have easy access to guns through their work. So these are three clear risk factors that we need to take note of. Then Mosaic, as I said, has been supporting people get protection orders. They've been working in 15 courts in South Africa. And over a period of almost 2 years, it wasn't quite, but almost that period, they helped submit over 23,500 protection order applications. Of those, these were then analyzed. So of those, just over 1% mentioned that there was a gun present. So it's a small number that mentioned. I don't know if the workers were primed to ask about a gun. So this could just be organic, that only 1.1% did the risk of a firearm get raised. So it is a low number, but still, because of the lethality of a gun, which, I mean, a gun some research shows it's 12 times more deadly than any other weapon in domestic violence. So, so it really is important to get it removed. The second finding was that it's overwhelmingly women who are the applicants. So 82% of applicants were women. On average, they had experienced 5 years of abuse before seeking help. So this is long-term abuse that many of these women have experienced. And again, confirming the risk of people who work in the security sector is that there was many of the respondents weren't working. There's a high level of unemployment, but of those who did work, 14% worked in the security sector. So I think that gives you a broad snapshot, but if we deep dive into the gun, so we're looking at that 1.1% of applicants who had spoken about a gun. So what we see is that over half of these people said that the perpetrator was a current or former partner. So again, that confirms the risk of an intimate partner, at the risk of an intimate partner to violence against them. But what was really interesting is that over 30% of perpetrators were family members. So these were men, but they could have been, for example, sons and fathers. And what's interesting about that is that we tend to think of domestic violence as involving a couple and either an ex-current partnership. But actually what this is showing is that domestic violence involving a gun doesn't really involve the partners. It involves other family members as well. Age did not protect people at all. I mean, victims ranged from 15 years of age to 80 years of age. And there were 7 adolescents who had applied for protection orders. And then in these protection orders, mention was often made of children being affected. So they had witnessed, it seemed, the abuse. It wasn't always clear exactly how children were involved, but about in 50% of these cases was there mention of children being affected. And that's important because we know that there's an intergenerational recycling of trauma that happens, and that shows what it looks like. And then I think what was really interesting is that in 100% of the cases in which a gun was mentioned, did the complainant report psychological or emotional abuse. So just the of the gun was enough to intimidate and scare and threaten people. So that's what the mosaic shows. So it gives a little bit of a glimpse of what gun violence in the home looks like without there being a femicide. So I wanted to go back to this question about when are guns a risk when we're talking about domestic violence. And I came across this continuum of abuse. And I thought it was quite powerful because what you see is like in Henrietta's story where you have this emotional abuse, coercive control, some threats and escalation, but he did physically abuse her. But it he tasered her, and he actually stamped on her foot one day and damaged her foot, but he never threatened her with a gun. And yet the gun was there all the time. Like she describes, he would come home from work. He was a police officer, so he'd come home for lunch. She was so aware that he was carrying a gun, and she was so afraid of the fact that he had a gun and how he could easily kill her, that she was just doing everything that he wanted as quickly as she could to just please him, to not anger him, to keep him calm. And so I guess in looking at this continuum, for me, it was like if a gun is present in any of these situations, then it's a risk. And we need to take action because that person shouldn't have a gun, that they are a high-risk person. And so, I mean, we as working in this space can inform women and other family members of the risks and what they can do to have a gun removed. So there are two laws that can be used to get a gun removed from situations of risk, and that could even be the most subtle of manipulations. I mean, to monitor it, to keep track of it. But the two laws are firstly the Domestic Violence Act, which I'm assuming that many of you know about, have used in your work. And it has been amended to strengthen it. But what it does, there are two clauses in particular that allow the courts to remove a gun. And what's really interesting about these is that they strengthen the law to such an extent that even if the person needs their gun for work, so for example, if they're a security guard or a police officer, the gun can still be removed. So provision is made for that. And then what needs to happen is that you or the person who's affected or a family member or a friend can apply on behalf of somebody. It need not be the victim of the abuse who makes that application. There's a new Form 6 that is available as part of the amendment to the Domestic Violence Act, and that includes questions about the presence of a gun. And then in the actual application of Form 6, you can say that you want this gun removed. And some people have asked us whether or not you can say that even if the gun is illegal. Absolutely. The person will also be charged with being in possession of an illegal gun. But you mentioned that the gun is easily accessible. The person has access to it, and you want that gun removed. So that's the Domestic Violence Act. Here are just some tips around completing the form, and then there are specific questions that are asked in the form. And we urge that people fill in the form themselves if they don't understand any of the words, that they ask questions, that they read over the form or get it read to them, etc. But there are particular questions around this. And Section 7 actually lists all the firearms and other dangerous weapons that the respondent has access to, so that the court is made aware of them and can order their removal. Then the second law that allows for guns to be removed is the Firearms Control Act. And there are really two sections in the law that make provision for this. The first is Section 102 of the Act. And under this provision, the police registrar, who's the National Police Commissioner, has got the power to declare someone unfit. And there are lots and lots of reasons that the registrar can declare someone unfit. But the three main ones here is that they've threatened to kill or injure themselves or somebody else. And this doesn't matter if it's with the gun or not. Okay, it's if they've made that threat. That because of their mental condition, violent behavior or substance abuse, that having a gun makes them dangerous. And lastly, that they failed to store their guns safely. As I said, there are other reasons for this, but these would be reasons to go to the police. And again, anyone can go to the police. It doesn't need to be the person who is the partner or ex-partner of the perpetrator. And they make a statement at the police station to start this process. The police should remove the person's gun immediately. We know that they don't always do this, but they should, and pressure should be put on them to remove the gun immediately. And then what happens is the police then investigate the complaint, and that would include holding a hearing. And so what happens is that they call the gun owner in, and they call the complainant in, and they ask questions. Now, in Gunfree South Africa's experience, what we've found is that the gun owner often pulls in a lawyer, and then the complainant, so for example, the wife, doesn't have that support. And in most cases, it seems that the police then find that the gun owner isn't unfit and gives the gun back. So we haven't, in our experience, this Section 102 hasn't been that effective just because the complainants are not as supported as they could and should be. But if the respondent is declared unfit, he then has 24 hours to surrender all his guns, ammunition, and licenses to the police. Now, you'll notice it says that he needs to surrender them. And another problem is that even if he's declared unfit, he doesn't surrender them and there's no follow-up. And you can imagine now how angry he is that his partner has reported him to the police. So this is a real risk situation for the partner. The second way that the Firearms Control Act allows for a gun owner's guns to be removed and for him to be declared unfit is under Section 103. And this basically is when a gun owner has committed a range of crimes, and then the court makes a decision that because of those crimes, he is unfit to own a gun. So, for example, domestic violence offenses, a range of violence, sexual abuse, or dishonesty offenses. But this is only if sentenced to imprisonment, not to a fine. If they're found in illegal possession of a gun, rape, kidnapping, terrorism, or public violence, and drug dealing or substance abuse. And in this situation, the court orders the police to seize all firearms. So it's not under like Section 102, where the gun owner has to surrender their guns. In Section 103, the court orders that those firearms and ammunition be seized. Although, as we know, this doesn't always happen. And so I'm coming to the end of this. I suppose the thing is to recognize that when there is an application to have an abuser's gun removed, it's a time of incredible risk. And so there also need to be other processes put in place. And I know that the National Shelter Movement has got incredible safety guidelines. And so we have developed a booklet to support the process to get a gun removed. And included in that is this link to the safety plan development that was developed by the National Shelter Movement. And of course, the National Shelter Movement's refuge, the shelters that it offers, is also a way to keep women and their children safe. And so we've included in this brochure the NSMSA's 24-hour helpline to support people. And then together with the Heinrich Bull Foundation, Mosaic, National Shelter Movement, we've developed this Removing the Trigger campaign booklet that describes the steps to be taken to get a gun removed, and that's available on various websites, including Gunfree South Africa's. And so these are the questions that I had, and I do hope we can have a conversation about these issues. But it was like, when you hear about Sasha Lee and Henrietta's stories, what really stood out for you? What do you think are the risk factors for gun violence? I've said that it's a history of gun violence, access to gun, including a licensed gun, and working in law enforcement. What are the other risk factors? Are there things based on your experience that you would add to that? Is there anything that surprised you about the Mosaic data? When women come to the shelter, how often do you find out that there is a gun involved? And is that a difficult conversation to have? Have you ever used the Domestic Violence Act or Firearms Control Act to get a gun removed? And what happens when protection orders are violated? Are they violated in your experience? So to just have a discussion around what we can do with this would be great, and where we can start focusing on our lobbying, advocacy, and education and awareness. Thank you.
Morning again. Everyone is welcome to unmute for the discussion and add your views. Thank you. Zinhle, you can unmute and talk.
Okay, thanks. I think what I was curious about throughout was, do we know of any details, maybe studies that look at maybe the number of police who have not removed guns when they were supposed to, and the consequences thereof. How does that go? What happens there? Are there any, are there any ramifications that they go through? What happens? Is that dealt with properly within the police? I know I might be off a bit from what you were talking about, but it just made me think of that. And I was just thinking that maybe is also exacerbating the issue that we have, because to hear that in a domestic abuse situation, a GBV situation, that a gun was not removed. I don't know. It just seems like the first thing that should be done. And I know that you have to report it and what have you. But yeah, I just wanted to know about that. If there's anyone who know of any studies that are detailed that have looked into that, because I think that does add to the problem we now have.
Zinhle, the research report that Lisa Vetten did does include some information on it, and it is a problem. So what she's done is she's looked at complaints that are made to IPID. That's the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. And it seems that failure to seize firearms by the police was a common complaint. So it does seem that it is, it happens, and it happens a lot more frequently than it should. To just say that with Sasha Lee Shah's murder, her mother, Jessica Shah, has been one of the most tireless advocates for justice for women and her daughter. And as a result of her advocacy, what has now happened is that the police official who was charged with removing the firearm from Dalal, who was the ex-boyfriend, she has now been charged with contempt of court because she didn't obey a court instruction, and culpable homicide because her action resulted in Sasha Lee's murder. And this is huge. This is such an important development. And let's hope that it's going to send a strong signal to other police officials who are charged with removing guns, who are instructed to remove guns. Because if they fail to do so, that they could face these kinds of charges. And this is the first time this has happened, and this is purely because of Jessica's lobbying and advocacy in this arena.
Thank you.
Ms. Lungile Magwaza, you raised your hand. You can unmute. Thank you.
Lungile, you muted.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Oh,
Slungile, you had your hand up. You can unmute and speak. Thank you.
Lungile, if you're not able to unmute, would you be able to put the question in the chat, please? There we have a question in the chat. If it's possible to share your presentations. Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Mel.
Thank you. Please, is it able if we can share your presentations?
yes, of course.
Thank you. Slu, if you can try one more time to unmute and ask your question.
Anyone who would like to ask questions, you are welcome to raise your hands. Thank you.
There's a
I mean, I
comment
think,
from
yeah.
there's a comment from Sharon. She says SAPS is slack in responding to calls from communities. Wait hours for vans to pitch.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had, experiences with that. I mean, I had a question from the people here. What is your experience of protection orders? Do you think that they are effective? What are some of the risks that you've experienced in the work that you've been doing?
You're more than welcome to make a comment in the chat if you're unable to mute as well.
I mean, just to say that there is an amendment to the Firearms Control Act that is currently sitting at NEDLA, and it includes provisions that were included in an earlier version of an amendment, which is really aimed at protecting from gun-related domestic violence. So it proposes suspending applications for a gun license. So when someone's applied and the process is underway, that process gets suspended if there is an application for protection order. And the same thing with their license. If they already have a gun license and there's an application for a protection order and an interim protection order has been granted, that person in the situation still needs to surrender their license, guns, and ammunition until the application has been finalized. And if it's a final protection order is issued, then they are declared unfit and they have to surrender their guns and ammunition. And so Gunfree South Africa strongly supports that, because what it does is it stops any kind of discretion. It's not like the police official needs to think, I wonder if this person is really a risk or not. It's like, no, the law says you must immediately seize those guns, ammunition, and licenses if there is an interim protection order in place. So we think that that's one way to help protect women and family members.
We have two more comments in the chat. One from Sharon again. Even if victims have the protection order, they're hesitant to use it, fear of further attacks from perpetrators. Then Cornelia says the process of applying or submitting the PO can be a bit of a challenge, especially for unemployed victims who need transport to get to a family court. And then she has a question. She says, my question would be, can an application be submitted at the police station?
So as far as I know, is that the application has to go to the court. It can't go to the police station. But I mean, this is particularly around firearm. Then obviously, Section 102 hearing can be submitted at the police station, but that is specifically around getting a gun removed. It's not about a protection order. So it's not going to, for example, say, that the person's not allowed within so many meters of you or allowed into your property, etc. It is purely about getting the gun removed from that situation, and that can be done at the police station. I mean, just to go back to Sharon's question, one of the real risks is that women are so afraid to take action because it's going to anger the respondent, and the respondent has got a gun. And so it's absolutely critical that that gun get removed, but that there are places of safety, safety plan put in place for women, because we know they are most at risk. But it's also, I think, that there is this continuum of violence, and that at some point there's a very real risk that it will spiral into death, and so it is vital to take action. And I think it's also that it need not be the victim, that it could be a family member or friend who steps in and takes action.
Okay, on the chat side, Ayanda Sitole, it's saying protection orders are effective. Our justice system is effective, especially in Pinetown Magistrate Court. Women do go back to court to report it. The protection orders are being violated, and arrests have been made. And then Mary Ann says that a protection order will be effective if the perpetrator is removed from the premises where the victim is living, because having a protection order while you're still living together is a big risk. People get killed while having a protection order. Thank you. You can keep the comments coming. You can ask your questions on the comment section, or you can raise your hand. Thank you.
Can I ask a question to Mary Ann and to others? I mean, would a protection order ever specify that the perpetrator needs to move out, or would a protection order go to protect someone?
Marianne, if you're able to unmute and comment, you can do that. Thank you.
Oh, sure, she asked. I did not hear the question. Type it. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Are there any other questions? You're more than welcome to raise your hand and unmute. Otherwise, you can post it in the chat. There doesn't seem to be any other questions coming through.
All right, Mel, thank you. Okay. Okay, so to Sharon Lemire, Ms. Glad Taylor has posted the question saying that would a protection order ever order a perpetrator to move out? That was the question.
Sharon, are you able to answer, or anyone else for that matter? Sharon has responded. She says it usually specifies for perpetrators not to come within meters, but this is just ignored most of the times.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult situation because you're reliant on the police to intervene, and we know that that doesn't always happen. But I guess it's coming back to, well, how then to keep people safe? And we do know that guns and other dangerous weapons increase the risk, of a murder. And so to really focus on getting, it's not just guns, it is other dangerous weapons as well, to get them removed. And, to make the courts and police aware that the perpetrator has access to them. I mean, I guess it's also like, did you know that there was this new form that could be used to apply for a protection order? Because for example, I found it really difficult to find. It just isn't readily available. And it's like, well, where would you look if you were looking for this form? Where would you get information to get this form to support the application of protection orders? Is there a good website that you know of that you would go to for up-to-date resources and support?
So Sharon is also added, she's saying that yes, exactly. And like she stated earlier, SAPS is slack in the response. She found having the sector VIN number helps somewhat.
Yeah.
If you have questions or comments, you can please add, or you can raise your hand. Okay, on the comment section, Mary Ann says that if there can be a law that states if there's a protection order against someone, that person be removed, same as with children are removed from their homes and families due to their behavior. Thank you, Mary Ann. Any questions or comment? Okay. Ms. Taylor is saying, where do you get the resources from? For example, where would you get the updated Form 6 application? Where would you get the updated Form 6 application for a protection order? And Mamelo is saying, how do we make our communities aware of everything presented today? This is very informative.
I mean, I guess that the last two, my question and Mamelo's, and thank you, Mamelo, that's so affirming, are kind of related. So it's almost like, well, where do you go to get information that you can trust, that's informative? And I mean, Gunfree South Africa works in communities. I see some of my colleagues are on board and run workshops, etc. But we're a small organization, so it's like, how do we empower people like you so that you too are aware and can support the work that you're doing to make communities and homes safer. And so it comes back to, well, what's a good space to have information that's available, that you can easily access, know where to find it, know that it's there, and that can guide you. You know, is the National Shelter Movement a good website? Do we make sure that
let me just get my as a speaker. Yeah,
Sorry about that, Claire. Please continue.
That's fine. I see Sharon has said starting at schools. Yes, so Gunfree South Africa, particularly in the Western Cape, but also in Joburg, is working with ECD centers, trying to make them toy gun-free zones. So to encourage more constructive play, at that level, but also working with particular constituencies like women to talk about what can be done to get a gun removed, to do self-defense classes, etc., but also men around what does society expect of them and how do they start challenging those gender norms. But I think, all of us have got a role to play in that.
Thank you so much. Do we have more comments or any questions? If you want to talk, you are welcome to raise your hand and unmute.
So what I'll do is send through the presentation to the organizers, and then also the link to the various resources that are available. So that would include, for example, the Form 6 application for a protection order, Lisa Vetton's research that she did. And then we've also got a little infographics that tell Henrietta's story, Sasha Lee's story, and then also a guide on what you can do to get a gun removed, both using the Firearms Control Act and the Domestic Violence Act. So all of that information will be included in that email and is available on Gunfree's website. So you can download that.
If there are no questions or further comments, we would like to say thank you very much to Ms. Claire and for the very informative presentation. And as she mentioned, the presentation or recording will be emailed to everyone who attended the webinar. Thank you so much to everyone who attended the webinar. We highly appreciate you attending or joining us on our webinars. And look out for our next webinar. We so much appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for organizing this.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks, Lungi. Blessed day to all.
Thanks, Melanie.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.